Joining me now is the chief economist for Moody's Analytics. It is Mark Zandi. He is a return guest, and as many people who follow me know, and is somebody I think is as good as anybody in this sort of like data-driven analysis. It's not, he tells you what is, not what he wishes. And so here we are. Mark, good to see you.
Yeah, Chuck, it's good to be on. We were just chatting. It was when was I on last?
It was April. It was early.
It was April.
Mid-April. Yeah. So it was just after Liberation Day, about a week or so after Liberation Day. And we were talking about, well, the delayed impact. When does it come? And at the time you said probably the first signs are going to be July. And well, here we are in August. And you tell me it feels like we're seeing those signs, right? It's like, oh, look at the Walmart prices. They're up. And look at, there are these little areas where you're starting to see the impacts. I mean, fresh vegetables. That is something I think folks didn't fully appreciate. How badly that was going to get impacted by these tariffs.
Yeah, you can see it in the data. We got a data point for producer price indicators at PPI indices, producer price indices. Remember, I always say PPI. I never really spelled out what that is exactly.
I appreciate you trying because, as I always say, we want to speak American on this podcast.
Yeah. PPI. That's what the prices that businesses charge each other, right? Before it gets to consumers. And so it's kind of a leading indicator for consumer prices, the prices we pay, you and I, when we go into the store. And they jumped in July by a lot, so it's coming. And even in the consumer price index, the CPI, the one that we all kind of know and love, you can see it, you can feel it. I don't know that, if you ask Americans, can you feel the tariffs, that they would say, yeah, I feel it. But you see it in the data, and all the direction of travel here suggests this is going to continue to be the case. And I think, if you invite me back in 2, 3, 4 months, we'll be able to say definitively Americans are feeling it.
There's been a lot of coverage over the last 3 or 4 weeks about how, hey, the predictions of doom and gloom on the tariffs haven't come to fruition. And I'm thinking, why are you writing this story now? It's too early to write this story. Is it, or are you, or is it surprising that the hit isn't harder yet?
It's pretty much the script. I never thought that the tariffs and the other policies that are being pursued, like immigration policy, would be what I call a cliff event. That we go off a cliff. That's immediate recession. I always thought it was more of a corrosive on the economy. But when the economy is under such pressure, and it is vulnerable to anything else that could go wrong, and thus recession risks, in my mind, are very high. But no, I think it's stuck pretty much to script. I mean, there are a few things that have slowed down the pass-through of the tariffs to consumers. All the so-called front-loading that went on.
Inventory front-loading, right?
Yeah, President Trump has kind of telegraphed very strongly that he's going to raise tariffs, and so importers have been working hard to get product into the United States before the tariffs actually are implemented. And we're still working down that inventory. So it won't be until you get to the other side of that you start to see the real price increases.
If you watch a TV ads, I think it's for Kia, could be Hyundai. It's one of the two Korean car companies who brag. They say in their advertising, we're not passing on the tariffs to you. And I'm thinking, yeah, because you already brought these cars over before you had to pay the tariffs is my guess. But I thought, well, good for them for the marketing, because they know people are thinking about those things when it comes to buying.
Well, they're in the political spotlight too, right?
I mean, a Kia or a Hyundai.
There's a big shiny light on them, I think though with the foreign producers, we'll start to see more of the price increases with the shift over in the model year. That's when we're going to get the model year changes over, and that's when they generally put in price increases. So we need to watch that very carefully. And
we're right at the beginning of that process.
Right at the beginning. Right? Yeah, generally, it's kind of August, September, right in there. So we'll see.
So are the conditions there for an interest rate cut? And is it a necessity, or is this something that it's probably being done with a little political pressure?
Even without political pressure, probably a cut is warranted. I mean, the other aspect of the tariffs, when you ask me, am I surprised, is growth. And there, the economy's growth rates have really slowed very sharply, in significant part due to the uncertainty created by the tariffs, but also the tariffs themselves. And you can see it in the job market. The job market is really throttled back. I mean, underlying monthly job growth is, 20, 30,000 jobs. I mean, that's nothing. And you're right on the border of a negative number. And I think we're going to get some negative numbers here. So if you're at the Fed and you're looking at that, you're saying, I'm going to put more weight on what's going on with respect to growth in the economy than I'm on inflation. And then you put the political overlay on top of that. Think about if we actually go into recession, what will happen with regard to the Federal Reserve. There's a lot of, obviously discussion about Fed independence. There's some talk in Congress about a piece of legislation to change the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, which would further impair the independence of the Fed. So if you're sitting at the Fed, the last thing you want is an economy going into recession in that political context. Right. And so they're weighting very heavily growth over inflation at this point. So therefore, I'd be surprised if they don't cut rates when they meet again in September.
And that should provide some impact in the economy. At least, that's the hope, right? That it triggers some investment, maybe delays planned layoffs. Is that
on the margin? This rate cut is well anticipated. I was just looking a few minutes ago. The market's
code for priced in, right?
Priced in. It's priced in. 85% probability that the Fed's going to do this in September, cut rates, and then cut rates on a consistent basis going forward until they so-called normalize rates, get rates down to something that probably closer. Right now, the federal funds rate target's just over 4. If you get it down closer to 3, that would be consistent with what they think is what they call equilibrium, where policy is not either supporting or restraining growth. And that's baked in, that's discounted, that's in the stock price, in stock prices and credit spreads and everything else. It does help in the sense that, some interest rates that, that matter to consumers and businesses will fall. So for example, if you owe money on your credit card, you should see that rate is extraordinarily high. It's over 20%. I mean, it's close to record high. That should come in. If you have a home equity line of credit, you should see pretty quickly a cut in your interest rate on that loan. If you're a small business person and you have a loan from a bank, it's usually tied to the so-called prime rate, which is tied to rate. So there are some, benefits if you're a borrower, but most of the benefit is already baked in to a significant degree because investors already have anticipated, what the Fed's going to do here.
So when you look at the state of the economy, let's start with employment. The current, what's a little bit scary, it's like, so we have multiple things happening. You have this cut in government, right? And you have this pullback in government funding to the states, which is going to have a follow-on effect, right? If we've seen federal government workers laid off, you're going to probably see state and local government because there's a whole bunch of money that the federal government had been helping states with. And we know the state budget crunch is coming. Essentially, the next legislative sessions around the country are going to be filled with a lot of tough choices because they've had a lot of free money, COVID being a big factor here to do that. So you're going to have on the government sector side, a shrinking of the labor force. Then you also have the issues that are associated with tariffs and the cost of things. So if fewer things are coming in, maybe you just have fewer workers in general dealing with your. And then you have the investment, all of the AI infrastructure investment, which doesn't actually create jobs.
Right.
So I look at that and think as an amateur observer that's probably a little overly informed and think, boy, this is a tough job market that's likely to get tougher in the next couple of years, given where investments are going in corporate America. What do you see, and what are you watching to see whether this sort of jobs Armageddon that may be coming for pink collar America is coming?
I agree with you. I think it's going to be a tough job market. Just a question of how tough. Whether we start getting negative employment numbers here. Actual outright declines in employment. I think that's a real possibility. The other way of you framed it very nicely. You kind of went sector by sector and said, where the jobs going to come from? Another way to do,
where is there job growth?
Yeah,
Right. I guess
exactly. The only, and that's one reason to be very nervous here. The only industry of consequence that's adding significantly to payrolls at this point is healthcare services, hospitals, doctors' offices, that kind of thing.
So our aging population creates jobs. Great.
Yeah. And some of that feels like catch up because the healthcare sector was slow to hire coming out of the pandemic for lots of reasons.
Sure.
But now they've caught up, and then you got to ask yourself, will the healthcare sector continue to create jobs to the degree that it has? And then you throw in all the other things you just said. The thing I'd throw into the mix is immigration. We're seeing a very sharp now decline in the immigrant labor force. And so obviously that's fewer jobs in construction trades, agriculture, manufacturing.
Well, is that fewer jobs, or is it just fewer jobs that'll get filled? Right. That's the question I have. If those folks aren't there, and what happens to those jobs?
Yeah.
What happens to the chicken processing plants, for instance?
Right. Exactly. Right. It's not like those positions are going to go away. They just can't fill them. They're just not going to fill them. So it shows up as no job growth when you would have expected some job creation in the construction trades or leisure hospitality or whatever it is, and you're not going to get it because you just don't have the bodies. You just don't have the workers. The other way of thinking about it is, or framing it is, hiring and layoffs. There's no hiring. Businesses writ large, pretty much across the board, healthcare being the exception, they just aren't hiring at this point. And that may go to the uncertainty created by policy. They're just nervous about what it all means. It could go partly to AI and the impact AI is starting to have, because a lot of the lack of hiring is in professional services and financial services and sectors where you expect AI. It's not like they're laying off yet because of AI, but they're not hiring because of AI.
Well, let's put yourself in the shoes of a CEO wondering if AI can create efficiencies. If I were running a small business or medium-sized business, and I wouldn't fill positions as needed yet. Right. I'd see, hey, what can we do with AI? Right. I wouldn't be laying people off, but I mean, that what you're describing is sort of like a very logical way. Like, let's see if AI can fill the gap here. And if it can't, okay, then I'll hire. But I'm going to wait maybe 6 months, to see how good these tools are and whether this really is a replacement level technology in the moment that we're living.
Totally. I think that's now small businesses, they have less latitude to do that. I think because there's just less room to maneuver. Right. But bigger businesses, absolutely. The largest employers in the country, absolutely. That's, I think, the way they're thinking.
It's probably the mindset. Yeah. That's what's so scary.
I don't, they're not laying off yet. That actually is the firewall between the weak economy that we have and the weak economy we're going to have, and recession. Yeah. And if in fact businesses say, oh, I can lay off because of AI, or I need to lay off because of tariffs and other reasons, other factors that are weighing on the economy or in my business, you start seeing some layoffs, then that's the fodder for an economic downturn. Because at that point, consumers will get spooked. Consumers are already very cautious. They're not spending. They're already going to have to pay higher prices for imported goods. Their purchasing power is going to be weakened. And that all adds up to a self-reinforcing negative cycle called a recession.
I have a friend of mine who remembers the last couple of recessions and said, and he also
is he an economist?
No. And
he's just a
poker player. Okay. But here's the thing. He goes to Vegas a lot.
Okay.
And as he said to me last week, he went off to try the World Series of Poker. He's somebody you've never heard of, because once he does well, you'll hear of him, right? But he hasn't done that yet.
Yeah.
But anyway, he's one of those, and he says, hey, nobody was in Vegas. Meaning,
really?
It felt empty. It felt, and he goes, it felt very similar, like what happened before the housing crisis. Felt very similar, and that is, right, like, it's one of the first places, when money's flowing, you have a little extra money, Vegas is an easy place to go visit.
Right.
When you don't have that extra money, it may be the first thing consumers cut back on.
Right,
are there other... That's an intriguing leading indicator to me.
Yeah.
One of those unofficial.
Can I ask, when was he there? When was he there?
2 weeks ago.
Oh, it was 2 weeks ago.
Now, some of this is Canadian,
I was going to say,
yeah, some of this is the Canadian boycott of America, which
and
I think
Europeans maybe to some degree.
Right. And that is and I don't know, how much you factor that in versus domestic.
Right.
But what other indicators like that is it worth keeping an eye on that might be foreshadowing what's coming?
Yeah, I tend to be a little bit more data oriented as opposed to like
anecdotal. Which is why you're here. I love that aspect about you.
But I love those anecdotes. I mean, they're always kind of cool. And I go to take a look, and sometimes they work, sometimes they don't.
Of course.
There's some esoteric kind of data points that people don't focus on, but I think are useful to gauge, whether we're headed down the dark path. So if we're going back to the job market, there's something called the diffusion index in the employment report. That's the percent of industries covered by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. There's some 350, 400 industries. What percent of them are not adding to payrolls, are actually laying off? And right now it's over 50%. Every time it rises over 50%, so more than half the industries are reducing payrolls. We're always in recession. We always go into recession, and we're there, right? 53% or something, which doesn't sound very high, but it's pretty damn high. And it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, the kind of the narrow focus of the job growth. That's really, in healthcare and just a handful of other industries. The other one that's really a bit esoteric again in the job market is unfilled positions in the manufacturing sector, because manufacturing tends to be it's one of the first sectors that goes into recession because it's very sensitive to interest rates and to the business cycle. And if the unfilled positions are coming down in that sector, that's a tell that manufacturers are starting to pull back. And if the manufacturing is going into recession, it's going to take the rest of the economy with it. And they're falling. They're weakening. There's fewer unfilled positions. I also, because my area of expertise, I'm an economist, and I'll opine, as you know, about many things, but I spend more time on the housing and mortgage markets. So I watch the housing market very carefully. And one other indicator that I watch is the kind of the sentiment of home builders. There's a survey that comes out every month based on a survey conducted by the home builders. And that fell again. We got a data point today. That fell again to the lowest level since in the middle of the pandemic, or when the Fed started raising interest rates. And that's a tell, that the economy is weakening. So there's a whole range of those kinds of very esoteric, off the beaten track kind of indicators, and they're all kind of saying, some are sending off red flares, some are sending off yellow flares. It's not uniform, but they're all saying, there's an issue here. The economy is struggling. It's got a problem.
Any counterfactuals? What's the counterfactual? Or let me put it this way. A year from now, you're here. Hey, we never dipped into recession. Why?
Well, the president and the Republican Congress can act, right? They've got another reconciliation bill that they can pass through with the next Congress, or the next budget year, I should say, on the other side of September into October. They could use that to provide some additional fiscal stimulus. So there's been a lot of discussion, for example, around cutting so-called stimulus checks, just cutting checks to households. Presumably, they would be lower middle income households. And you could frame it as, I've gotten all this tariff revenue. Right. You, the American people, we know the American people are paying it because you can see it in the tariff revenue that's being generated. We're going to take that tariff revenue, or some portion of that tariff revenue, and rebate it back in the form of a check, kind of sort of what we did during the pandemic. Right. And that would juice things and keep the economy moving forward.
How does that not supercharge inflation?
It would add to inflationary pressures. But if the economy is struggling, if we're losing jobs, you can provide just enough juice to get the economy back on track. No recession. That was your question, but not generate that inflationary pressure, or not generate to the degree that it'll push us back into recession, or not push us back into recession anytime soon. It's pushing the problems down the road. So the recession doesn't come next year. The recession comes in 2027 or 2028 or 2029, something like that.
Push it down the road.
Yeah. So that would be one way out.
Look, I look at, obviously I follow a political calendar. and I look at economic data and wonder, when does it impact the political calendar? And when it comes to the midterms in November, what the economy is in the spring of 26 is what voters will be voting on come November of 26. So where are we headed in the spring of 26? And I ask that, frankly, personally petrified of where we may be headed in the spring of 26. But, look, forecasting's not easy. There's always interventions that could happen. But assume we get these couple of rate cuts that are coming September and December, that becomes consistent. But this job sort of stagnation pattern continues. We have the tariffs are more embedded in than ever. It looks like fewer and fewer waivers that are coming or delays. What does the spring of 26? What are the most likely scenarios in the spring of 26?
Yeah, I think that's when the economy is going to be at its weakest. That's when inflation will be at its highest as a result of the tariffs and the immigration policy. You just kind of do the arithmetic between when the tariffs have come in, and they're still rising. They're still we've not seen the end of this.
Now there's a point where it does stop rising, right? When it's all when you hit is it because I've had some people argue to me on the right, which is when I say the right, the new right, that used to be a different type of conservative economist, but the argument is, well, it's not continuously inflationary, right? That once the price level is baked in, then it's not going to continue to go up once it hits its tariff baseline. And then, yes, it'll take a little bit for the economy to get used to that, but then we can have a new equilibrium. Is that just naive?
No, well, by itself, that's right. I mean, that's just arithmetic in that I put in the tariff, that some portion of that tariff gets passed through to consumers. Presumably that's a one-off increase. And then at the end of all this, inflation settles back down. But you asked for next spring, and by next spring, we're still feeling effects of the tariffs. That one-off increase is still going out.
Still going to see like new increase to us.
Yeah. Right. I mean, because the effective tariff rate today is 10%-ish. It started the year at 2. We're at 10. Everything says we're going at least to 15, maybe as high as 20. And that's going to play out over the course of the next 6 months. Then that all translates through. By the spring of 2026, these tariff increases will be at their apex in terms of their impact on inflation. So just to give you a number, if there had been no tariffs whatsoever, my sense is that inflation as measured by the consumer expenditure inflator in the spring of 2026 would have been 2.25.
Wow, that's almost where it needs to be.
That's where the Fed wanted it to go.
Right.
Now with the tariffs, it's going to be 3.5-ish, something like that. So that's a big difference, and people will feel that. Now, of course, going back to back to the point about whether the tariff increases will result in persistently higher inflation. You can't completely dismiss that possibility, right? Because it does depend on whether the inflation created by the tariffs affect people's expectations about future inflation, and they start demanding from their employers higher wages, and the employers say, "Oh, okay, I can pass that through. I'll give you the wage increase," and then you get into that kind of wage price reinforcing dynamic, which means inflation becomes more persistent. Now, everyone's of the view, including the Fed when they start cutting rates, that that's not going to happen, but you can't rule that out in the context of, all the things that we know about the inflation expectations. The other thing I'd say is the other policies that are being implemented, including the restrictive immigration policy, that's inflationary, and that's more persistent inflation. That's not like that's going away.
Well, I informed my listeners last week, I buy my chicken at Trader Joe's. And Trader Joe's clearly is having the cost of chicken has gone up. But instead of but they decided on shrinkflation, so they didn't have to raise the price of chicken thighs. But guess what? Instead of 4 chicken thighs to a package, which you could get for about $3.50, is now 3 chicken thighs to a package that you're getting for about $3.15. Right?
Interesting.
But so they're choosing, and they have they know their customer base. Right? Shrinkflation is right now where they'd rather be than not. But that, for me, when I see the rise in price of chicken, that feels like direct impact of the immigration policy. No?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And by the way, that shrinkflation is captured in the inflation statistic, at least in theory.
Okay.
The Bureau of Labor Statistics, the keeper of the data, does account for the quote unquote the quality of the product or service that you're buying. So if you're getting fewer peas in the can or less, it was 3 as opposed to 4 chicken. Was it? What did you have? Thighs?
Chicken thighs. Yeah, it's
Just
chicken
thighs. Okay,
Yeah.
chicken thighs.
3 instead of 4 now. Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
It's essentially the same price.
Yeah. Just one other quick point about your question about the spring of 26. It's not only about inflation, it's about jobs, because that's when the economy could be at its weakest too. So if you said to me, hey, Mark, given everything that's going on, when do you think that next when the recession would hit? Kind of sort of feels, starting maybe late this year and then more likely early next. So spring of 2026, the economy will be weak. But remember, there's a lot of moving parts here, and Congress and the administration can come up with a stimulus package to kind of, help paper things over for a while at least.
No, I mean, look, Donald Trump's strategy is, I always say if you actually follow his business practices, he's always, it is the old Popeye metaphor. I'll gladly take a hamburger today. I'll pay you tomorrow for a hamburger today. I mean, he's constantly going to try to push this off as long as he can, if he can. Right? There's only so many tools that they have in the toolbox.
Yeah. Well, you said it, not me. So
no, I understand that, and I'm not asking you to play partisan, but you're not wrong to be wondering what could the government do. That is going to be his instinct. Hey, let's do something. Yeah.
And to be fair, I think that's most politicians' instinct, right? I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, here's these tariffs. So they're done under executive order, and they're generating a lot of revenue, and you're thinking, well,
look, I think the courts could throw them out, and then of course then it becomes, that this is in my bailiwick, not yours. Then it becomes him asking Congress for the authority back, which is what he would do, and then suddenly it becomes a vote on a tax increase. Right? Like, okay, you're about to raise prices 10% on everybody's consumer good. You're passing essentially a national sales tax of 10%. Are you comfortable doing that in an election year, Congressman Schmengi? Right?
Yeah, exactly.
That's going to be suddenly the political equation enters into this conversation.
But also think about if you're thinking about the revenue for the budget, you're at the Congressional Budget Office, your CBO, you're thinking about what does these tariffs mean for the budget over the next 10 years. I wouldn't count on these tariffs being around, going back to who is ever president, because the next recession, we are going to get, those tariffs are going to come down. That's a natural, quick way for the next president.
It's stimulus without having to do anything, right?
You without legislation. Yeah. What's better than that, right? So I wouldn't count on those tax revenues, those tariff revenues, but I'm just saying that you can use those things to kind of manage an economy through a period of time when you want to do it politically.
All right, let me ask you about 2 counterfactuals, which could sort of, which could sort of change this potential forecasting. One is, I've read a lot about the sort of that moment. I guess it was Alan Greenspan with a bunch of economists of going, hey, I don't think productivity is factoring in the computer age very well.
Right.
Is there hidden productivity not being factored into the data right now via AI, or is that just too soon to tell?
I think it's too soon to tell. I don't think so. I don't I don't think that's what's happening here. I mean, back in the 90s, there was more evidence that prices were falling for different things related to the internet, like chip technology, that kind of thing. And we knew that was not being captured in the way the Bureau of Labor Statistics was measuring things. So there was strong economic statistical evidence that we were missing something here in the data. I don't see that in the current data. I don't. And I even more intuitively, I'm not sure AI is really lifting productivity. For example. You're a business person. You have, and I'm a business person, right? I run a business. I have a couple hundred economists in my world around the world, and I'm always thinking about productivity growth. And I've got in the queue a number of productivity enhancing things that I want to do. None of them are home runs. All of them are singles. But I know I have a high probability of hitting the single. But if I'm going to invest in AI, I have to redirect resources away from hitting the single to try to hit that home run. Right. And by so doing, I'm giving up the singles in the interim until I hit the home run. And I'm hoping I hit the home run because I absolutely need it. If I don't, but I've given up these singles and I've given up productivity growth. So I could even argue reasonably, I think, up to this point in time, in aggregate, that the AI may be costing us productivity, not enhancing productivity. And the other thing about things like AI, other technologies, is they don't really lift productivity until new businesses form and optimize their business around that new technology. When legacy companies, old companies built on different technologies, try to adopt the new technology, it creates all kinds of havoc. Right. You know, you've got to change, you got to restructure, you got to fire people, you got to hire new people, you got to buy new equipment, new software, you got to do all kinds of stuff. And so it just takes time for these technologies like AI to diffuse in a way that really lifts underlying productivity. Don't get me wrong. I think AI, and we're using it, and I'm using it now, and I can see the power of it, and I can feel it. And so I'm confident it will lift productivity growth. Not in a dystopic way that some people think that it's going to wipe out all these jobs and people are going to be unemployed, but I think it's going to lift productivity growth. But I think it's going to take some time. I don't think it's this year. I don't think it bails us out this year.
It's a little early for that. All right. And the other part of AI right now is just the massive investments that are taking place, right? Whether it's particularly the largest cap companies who are just, I assume that's one-time impact into our growth numbers.
Yeah. Yeah, when you're making the investment, yeah.
Right, when you're making these investments, does that stave off recession because of just the amount of money? And it is. I mean, this data center now, it's not creating human jobs, yes, for electricians and some IT specialists, of course, but that's the scary part. It's all this investment into a future of no new employees. But I assume that has some positive impact on economic growth in the short term.
It does. It is definitely a tailwind to growth, and it's without that tailwind, we could be in recession already. We could be there already.
You think it's possible that it's already nasty?
So it's definitely juicing things, but it's not. It's a modest tailwind. I mean, like for example, if you look at all construction spending on construction, from home building to amusement parks to hospitals to data centers. It's falling. The construction sector is in recession, and that's despite the booming growth in investment in data centers. So it's definitely helping cushion whatever's going on in the economy, but it's not enough to forestall these broader macro forces that that are likely play out here over the next 6-12 months.
All right, we've just discussed sort of the state of the economy, state of the next 6 months, based on a lot of data that you've analyzed that is produced by the federal government. You know where I'm going here.
Right,
okay?
Exactly.
Which
for
is,
sure.
What happens? Walk me through your life with a BLS that does not produce monthly data.
Well, everyone's life, right? I mean, think about if we don't have timely, accurate, comprehensive data on how the economy is performing, and the BLS, Bureau of Labor Statistics, is key to that. They produce this consumer price index. We talked about that. They produce the jobs numbers. We talked about that. Businesses can make good decisions about investing, hiring, firing. The Federal Reserve can make good decisions about should I cut rates, not cut rates. None of us investors can't make good decisions about the investment in stocks and bonds that's going to add to interest rates. There's a gazillion ways that we're all going to pay a price for that if we don't continue to have timely, accurate, and comprehensive data. And in the case of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, sure, there's problems measuring things. There always is, and just given the scale and scope of what they're trying to do. But the answer
must factor that into the way you look at things. Like I had somebody tell me it takes 3 months to get 1 month of good data.
No.
Okay.
In typical times, that is absolutely not true. I mean, the revisions. So whoever that is, they're focusing on the revisions to the data. They're saying, I have to wait for 3 months to get enough responses to get enough good information to publish it.
That by August, I'll have a good sense of what June looked like.
Yeah. In 95% of the times, not so. The data, when you get the first month's worth of data, that's going to tell you exactly what you need to know going forward. There are times, though, when the economy turns, like now, when it's going from a good economy in 2024 to a tough economy in 2025 and a potentially recessionary economy in 2026. That's a turning point. When there are turning points, then the surveys become more complicated and the data becomes more murky, and the initial estimates that you get are less representative of the reality of what's going on because the economy's turning. It's going down.
Right.
But that's information. So the fact that we're getting these big downward revisions is actually a tell. That's another tell. You asked me what indicators would I look at? I'd look at that indicator.
That's a big indicator to you.
That's a huge indicator. If you're getting big downward revisions, that's a tell that the economy is sucking wind, and it may actually be in recession already. If history is any guide. So I don't buy into that whatsoever. And the answer to all of this isn't stop publishing because the one response policy step I've heard is, well, we're not going to publish the data every month. We're going to publish it every 3 months. To your point that we don't, but the answer to getting better data isn't doing that. The answer to the better data is fund the Bureau of Labor Statistics, give them the resources they need. In fact, here's another interesting point. Consumer Price Index, CPI. We're all focused on that like a laser beam because that tells us about inflation and what's going on with inflation. The Fed needs that information as quickly as it possibly can to make good decisions. Almost a third of the products that are canvassed by the Bureau of Labor Statistics to construct that measure, they send actual people out there to Trader Joe's. They get that packet of chicken and they say
to see that for themselves, not just take that But
because of the cuts to BLS payrolls, because of the Doge cuts, they can't send out as many people, and therefore now they're imputing, so-called imputing. That's a technical word for coming up with making stuff up based on other data. It's certainly not as accurate, as good as a survey, and that compares to a third is now imputed. Before this, if you go back a year ago, it was 10%. So the answer is, please, give the BLS more people so they can do more surveys and they can get better data, and the result will be a more accurate, a more timely, more comprehensive set of data. That's the answer. That's the solution. But if you're not going to do that, certainly don't cut back on the timeliness of the data that we're receiving.
Look, if this gets so politically interfered with, where you don't have confidence, forget the politics of this a minute, your own politics, anybody's politics. You're at Moody's. Your job is to try to assess the state of the economy in different aspects. And if you can't get reliable data from the U.S. government, what's the alternative? How do you backfill that yourself? And is it realistic to create essentially a private BLS that the financial community could rely on?
Well, there's no way to replicate what the Bureau of Labor Statistics is doing in the private sector. That's a classic, what economists call public good, right? I mean, that's the benefit of that's going to be shared broadly by everyone in the economy, and it should be paid for by everyone. And there's just no way for a private sector entity or entities to find the economics viable to do what the BLS is doing. And by the way, it couldn't be done because there's all kinds of privacy issues and security issues. And if you're canvassing a major American corporation, how many people you ask them how many people do they employ? They're not going to tell another private sector how many people.
Private company, employ. Right. The government, they already distrust the government enough, and
that's one of the reasons why the survey responses are down, because they already the lack of trust. So. But we're not standing still. Well, we're going to try hard here. So there's some data we have a better shot at coming up with estimates of what's going on than others, like the CPI, the Consumer Price Index. We have a shot at that, right? Because those are prices that are out there in the public domain. Amazon posts them, Walmart posts them.
In theory, you could put together something that would give us a fairly accurate,
and in the past, some have, like Harvard, Cavallo, Billion Pieces Project. He did this because of Argentina. Argentina obviously made up a lot of data back in the day because they were hiding their inflationary problem. And so as a way to figure out what was actually going on, he constructed this Billion Pieces Project to canvass Argentinian businesses to get a better read on what the inflation actually was. And it worked for him. And so we'll do that, for CPI. But for jobs, that's a lot harder. Now we'll rely on other sources. There, in the case of jobs, we have ADP, That's the human resource company. And I used to construct that data for them. And it is a very large sample of companies. It's not as representative because
it's about half of corporate America, right? There's two big firms that do this, right? ADP, I feel like there's a
there's no ADP is the largest, I think, by far.
Yeah, they're the largest one. And
there's others that are kind of smaller.
Got it.
But the problem with ADP, though, if you're using payroll processing services, which is how they get the data, you've got to be a pretty good sized company. A small company is going to do their own payroll. They're not going to hire. So you're missing all that stuff that's going on. So it's not exactly right, but it gives you a window into what's going on. But here's the other point. It's not like people aren't going to make inferences about what's going on in the economy and inflation if they don't get the data from the BLS. They're going to continue to do it. Right. This is going to do it based on bad data, worse data, right?
Well, let me ask you this. There's bad data out there internationally. Like I had an economist tell me, who's very worried about, if the Fed essentially gets merged with the Oval Office, right? I'm being a little dramatic, but that we've seen a version of this. It's called Turkey, and that the data you get out of Turkey is highly unreliable. Is that are there examples like that where maybe we could say, hey, be careful here, U.S. Congress, be careful here, government entities. You don't want to end up like a country X here where their economic data is just not believable.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Turkey's a good example. I mentioned Argentina. Of course, China is the poster child, right? For their data. The quality of their data. And private sources have figured out different ways to kind of measure what's going on. They have satellites that look them out, how much light is emanating from Shanghai. That'll give you a sense of GDP. That's what we're going to be reduced to.
Wow.
Yeah, that's an issue. But having said all that, Chuck, look, I think the BLS has been around since 1883, right? And it's a highly professional organization with lots of checks and balances. It's going to be pretty tough to monkey with that, at least quickly. I mean, maybe over time. And maybe there's some things you can put your finger on the scale here or there. And I'm not saying that's what's going to happen. It's possible. But I don't feel at this point, we'll have to see what happens here, exactly what changes actually occur, if any. But at this point, I think it's still run in a very professional way. The BLS, the BEA, the census, the other major government statistical agencies. So I think we're not. Turkey it's premature to start going down that path. I think we're a long way from that. But we should keep our eyes on this. It's very, very important to understand what's going on.
When we talk about the potential for a recession in 26, perhaps into 25, you're assuming global recession?
It's pretty tough for the U.S. to go into recession and not drag a lot of other countries in with it. And of course, Mexico and Canada are already, if not in recession, they're even closer than we are because they're struggling with all the tariffs that have been imposed and all the turmoil that's being created by the uncertainty.
No, I mean, I'm hearing anecdotal. I have Mexican relatives who tell me already they're seeing huge price spikes in the grocery store, just big ones already, and in the Walmart that they've felt. Does that make sense to you that they might feel the effects quicker than we would?
Well, I'm a little surprised, but maybe because there's no political spotlight on them in Mexico as compared to here in the U.S. Maybe that's interesting though. But Europe is also struggling. China's not going gangbusters. It's okay. That's the other major economy in the world. So if we go into recession, pretty tough to think that much of the rest of the world won't be dragged along and the globe will suffer a downturn as a result.
This may be asking you to do too much on sort of, I know forecasting's hard enough when you're trying to do it month to month, quarter to quarter, even year to year. But the long-term impact of this sort of, if we're going to be nationalist about our economy, right, and do everything we can to protect our economy, every other country has to sort of react the same way. What is that long-term effect if we suddenly have everybody being nationalist with their economic policy? I mean, is it just things like, hey, you're not going to be able to just get certain things at certain times of the year. Did you enjoy avocados anytime you wanted in the year? You're only going to get them seasonally. That's one example that I've heard that we may feel. But what are some of the larger term impacts of a global race for protectionism?
Well, this is just flipping what the world's gone through over the past 30 years on its head, right? I mean, we've been in the process of globalizing really since
bringing barriers down everywhere.
Yeah,
right.
Since World War II, it's been pretty steady process, and it's across trade, it's across investment, it's across immigration, along tourism, kids come into our schools, along every dimension. There's been increased globalization, and I think the evidence is overwhelming that in aggregate, we've benefited enormously. The country is
just look at poverty rates.
Yeah.
We've
think about
brought more people
rate
out of poverty in the last 50 years than we did in the first million. I mean, however you want to calculate it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, the benefits of the globalization were skewed, right? To folks like me and you, we can sell our talents to the rest of the world, and we benefit from that. In many other parts of the U.S., particularly in manufacturing in the middle part of the country, in the Southeast, got crushed by that globalization because China came in, and it's other countries, but that was the poster child,
the big one, right?
And I think that goes a long way to obviously explaining our fractured politics at this point, because we screwed that up. We, the collective we, didn't think about that everyone needed to come along for the ride here and benefit, not exactly equally, because this is America, but no one should be left behind as a result of the globalization process. But we did. And so now here we are, and we're in reverse. We are deglobalizing. And so it stands to reason, if we benefit from the globalization, we're in aggregate going to be hurt by the deglobalization that occurs. And by the way, the folks that were hurt by the globalization, I don't necessarily think they're going to benefit from the deglobalization either.
No.
I mean, it's not like, as you point out, or maybe you pointed this out before we got on, we started having the conversation here. This isn't about jobs. Even if the tariffs were to bring back manufacturing activity, factories, but by the way, I don't think that's going to happen. But even if it did, they don't employ anybody, right? These are robots.
No, they're all automated. Yeah,
it's all automated. There's no jobs. There's no jobs there. So, I think that's the sort of from broad perspective, we will be diminished by it. And actually, there's a great case study. Just go look at the UK. UK began deglobalizing in earnest with Brexit in 2016. Do a chart of UK GDP, over the last 30 years, and you'll see very clearly a step down during the financial crisis. Then you'll see Brexit, and then the slope of the line bends down. So here we are growing this in a nice pace, and now it's bent down. And then, of course, you see another step down because of the pandemic. So UK is a shadow today of what it would have been if Brexit had never happened. And that's a great case study for our future if we go down this path.
By the way, just as an economy, we came out of COVID about as well as any major economy around the world, didn't we?
Better than anybody.
Yeah.
Better than anybody.
That's it's one of those things. I've said this before. It's like, look, I'm aware of the politics of pandemics. I mean, 1917 and 18, we were at each other's throats, and, we didn't trust each other either. I mean, this isn't a new phenomenon, right? This is human nature. We don't, it is something distinct. But it does feel as if collectively, despite our polarized politics, our lawmakers responded correctly to this crisis in a way that they didn't to the financial crisis of 2009.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, they were fully committed. Both Republican and Democrat ultimately came together and did what was necessary to get the economy back.
The choice was, as I said, inflation or recession, and we chose inflation.
Right. Well, even there, I think the inflation would have happened almost regardless because of the supply chain disruptions in the Russian war and prices. So I'm not even that. I'm not the inflation that we got because of the fiscal support. That was by design. I mean, at that point, the Fed was trying to get inflation above target, because they wanted to compensate for the below target inflation that we'd seen since the financial crisis. So I don't think there was anything undesirable about the inflation right up until Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022 and oil prices went skyward, agricultural prices went skyward, and that's when inflation became the real problem that it was. But the U.S., in my view, managed through the pandemic admirably well. Now, it was costly, $5 trillion, 20%, it had debt to GDP, so that was not cheap. Right. We got the economy back up fully, running up in full swing well before anybody else. Go compare us to China or Europe or anyone else. And actually, if it's hard to believe, but if you just think back a year ago, the conversation was about American exceptionalism. We were doing better than anybody else.
Everybody else.
And everybody wanted to be us. They wanted to be just like Mike. They wanted to be the United. What are you guys doing that we should be doing? So we're doing something wrong. But, obviously we're not. It's a very different story now.
All right, let me get you out of here on this, which is the debt question, right? Which is this, there's a lot of smart people that I talk to very worried about the debt, continue to wonder when is this the moment that we're not crying wolf and the wolf actually is here? What say you?
I think we're as close as we've ever been. I mean, I look at three measures. They're all flashing red. One is the deficit to GDP. That's the size of our deficit each year, 6%. That's extraordinary. Even excluding the interest payments on the debt, it's 3%. That's called the primary deficit. We're at full employment. Everyone's employed. What happens when we go into recession? 6% is extraordinary.
Where are we finding that stimulus?
Yeah. 3% is extraordinary primary deficit. Second, our interest payments as a share of revenue or GDP. It's almost at a record high. It will be at a record high imminently. We're spending more on our interest now than we are on our own defense. All the trend lines there look, pretty ugly. And then the debt to GDP, that's the amount of debt we have outstanding. That's 100%. It's now at 100% debt to GDP. It was, just to give a context, it was closer to 25, 30% before the financial crisis. So that's how quickly things have turned in terms of our fiscal situation. And here, the direction of travel is also very disconcerting. We know exactly going forward what's going on. So we've rarely been in this situation where all these indicators are saying the same thing. We got a problem. And global investors are nervous. They're skittish. That's why the euro.
But aren't we still the cleanest pair of dirty underwear in the hamper?
We're still the cleanest, but we're pretty dirty. And then global investors are noticing the dollar is not appreciating and all this. It's falling in value. Gold prices are at record highs. Crypto is at a record high. That is indicative of some concern by global investors in the willingness and ability of us to pay on our debt in a timely way. And so, I think I don't know when the day of reckoning is, but the trend lines here suggest that there will be one, and it may not be as far off in the future as people think.
Sounds like if we were a company and not a country, the advice would be to sell the stock.
Yeah, except we can print our own money. So that's the next step here. Yeah. So you could, if you're a company, you can print your own money, so that buys you a lot of time.
Yeah, I think only Amazon does that. I don't know.
Yeah, okay, there you go.
I have no idea. Right. Just more prime.
Right.
Well, you sound like you're cautiously pessimistic about the near-term economy. Is that a fair description?
Yeah, look, I think the underlying strength of the economy, American economy is underlying it all is strong. We are a dynamic economy. Just look at our tech companies. I mean, they're just a marvel.
You'd still rather be us than China or
anybody else on the planet. It's just that economic policy is making life very difficult, and that is raising a lot of concerns about pushing the economy into recession when really doesn't need to be this at all.
Well, I was just going to say, can you think of a time when essentially politicians created a recession?
Certainly not like this.
Where, not this direct, where it really is a political decision.
I mean, policies always plays a role. Usually it's like you're in the middle of some mess.
Right, and a miscalculation or something.
A miscalculation, right? There's a miscalculation.
Right, this is not a miscalculation.
No, this is an intentional.
Yeah, this is a belief.
This is by intent. Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't think of anything. No.
Mark Zandi, I always learn a lot from talking with you, and I think, like I said, you speak American. Not many economists know how to do that.
Oh, I really appreciate that. Thank you, Chuck. Anytime.
Well, look, at least we have football season to distract us from this weakening economy.
Eagles, go Eagles.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, you've been spoiled. You've been spoiled now. Are you Phillies too? I was just at the Nats games this weekend.
I'm sitting in the suburbs. Yeah.
Man, it's been pretty good to be a Philly area fan these days, isn't it?
Yeah. We've had with good
you guys
string.
Are good grievance fans. Usually, you're more fun when you're not winning because you guys get
we complain regardless.
Yeah,
we complain regardless.
Too much winning.
Yeah. Or you're not winning enough. You're not winning gracefully enough, Well,
what I do like is your fan base went from questioning Jalen Hurts to now saying, hey, you don't speak bad about our quarterback.
Yeah,
we'll speak bad about our quarterback, but you don't get to do it. Right.
That's right. That's right. Oh, I see a deer out here eating my rose bush. I'm going to hustle.
You got it.
Take care now, Chuck.
As always, save your shrubbery economy.
I got to. That's my prized rose bush. I'll talk to you later.
Bye now.